On a tragic day that shook the world, a routine helicopter flight turned into a heartbreaking disaster. What began as a hopeful journey ended in a devastating crash, leaving behind unanswered questions and immense loss. This was not just another flight, it carried lives, dreams, and expectations. The news of the crash spread like wildfire, and the world watched in disbelief as details slowly emerged. In this video, we will take you through the events leading up to that fateful flight, what went wrong, and the lasting impact this incident had on the families, friends, and communities affected. Background on the helicopter flight, extended. The decision to charter the helicopter was not an uncommon one, particularly for high-profile individuals in the fast-paced environment of Los Angeles. Time was a precious commodity, and for many in business, sports, and entertainment, avoiding the often paralyzing traffic of the city was essential. Helicopter travel offered a reliable and efficient alternative to navigating the congested freeways that crisscrossed the sprawling city. In particular, the passengers aboard this flight were on their way to a highly anticipated sporting event, a tournament that held personal and professional importance. It was an occasion they were excited to attend, and the flight represented a practical choice to avoid delays. Most of the passengers had used helicopters for transportation in the past, making it a routine mode of travel for them. The flight had been scheduled carefully, taking into consideration the needs of the passengers and the potential weather conditions. When they boarded the helicopter that morning, there was no indication of what lay ahead. The day began like any other, with hopes of a smooth journey and a successful arrival at their destination. However, as is often the case in aviation tragedies, a perfect storm of circumstances conspired against them. Despite all the planning, experience, and technology that went into making this a safe and routine flight, unforeseen factors began to emerge, and the short trip that was supposed to take less than an hour turned into a disaster that shocked the world. Details of the helicopter, extended. The Sikorsky S-76B was not just any helicopter, it was considered a top-tier aircraft for private and corporate use. Its design combined luxury and functionality, often used by Fortune 500 companies, medical teams, and even royalty. The model was first introduced in the late 1970s and had since built a solid reputation for its dependability and performance. This particular helicopter was outfitted with state-of-the-art avionics, including navigation and communication systems that were designed to assist pilots in maintaining safe control, even under less than ideal weather conditions. The twin engines provided an additional layer of safety. If one engine failed, the other could typically sustain the flight. Pilots who flew the S-76B appreciated the aircraft for its responsiveness and robust construction, giving them a sense of security while transporting important clients. On that fateful day, the helicopter was in good working order. Maintenance checks had been completed recently, and there were no mechanical issues that would have raised any red flags. The pilot, who was seasoned and familiar with the helicopter, had successfully completed similar flights many times before. But as any experienced aviator knows, even the most advanced technology and reliable equipment can fall prey to the forces of nature, which often act with little warning and devastating consequences. Passengers on the flight, extended. The identities of those on board added an additional layer of shock to the tragedy. Among the passengers were individuals who had made an impact on the world through their work, most notably in the sports and entertainment industries. One passenger, a highly respected figure in professional sports, was admired for his work ethic, leadership, and contributions to both his team and his community. His presence on the flight turned what was already a heartbreaking incident into an international headline. He wasn't just a star on the field, he was also a beloved father and role model to many, dedicating his time and resources to causes that help young athletes and underprivileged communities. For him, this flight was supposed to be a routine trip to a sports event where he would play an important role, both as a participant and a mentor to young athletes who idolized him. Along with this prominent figure, other passengers included family members, people who were loved not just by those close to them, but by the millions who had followed their careers, lives, and philanthropic work. Children were among those lost, adding to the grief and horror. The crash didn't just claim the lives of famous individuals, but also of those whose stories were yet to be fully written, leaving behind heartbroken families struggling to understand how such an accident could have taken place. Takeoff and the journey extended. The takeoff from Orange County was smooth, with no immediate weather concerns. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, the passengers might have felt a sense of anticipation for the day ahead, unaware of the dangers that lay ahead. The morning was crisp, the skies were clear, and the pilot was in constant communication with air traffic control. At this stage, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The helicopter's altitude and route were carefully plotted to avoid the heavy traffic below and ensure a quick trip to the event. The city of Los Angeles sprawled beneath them, its highways packed with cars moving at a snail's pace. From their vantage point, the passengers likely felt a sense of relief at having chosen to fly instead of being stuck on the congested roads below. The journey was meant to save them hours, allowing them to arrive at the event refreshed and on time. However, the smooth sailing of the early part of the journey would not last long. As the helicopter began to approach the outskirts of Burbank, conditions started to change. While there was no sign of trouble at first, the flight would soon face a series of challenges that would culminate in tragedy. Burbank airspace complications extended. As the helicopter approached Burbank's busy airspace, the pilot encountered the first significant hurdle of the journey. The skies over Burbank, a major hub for aviation in the region, are often crowded with both commercial and private aircraft. It is a high-traffic area that requires constant communication and coordination with air traffic control to avoid conflicts with other flights. In a situation like this, timing is everything, and any delay in receiving clearance to proceed can have ripple effects. The pilot was directed to enter a holding pattern, waiting for the airspace to clear before continuing. This is not uncommon for helicopters and planes in busy airspace, but it can cause complications. While in the holding pattern, the weather began to deteriorate. Fog started to roll in, blanketing the landscape in a dense, thick mist that reduced visibility to dangerous levels. At this point, the pilot had to make critical decisions. Flying in such low visibility conditions without clear visual reference points is extremely risky, especially for aircraft operating under Visual Flight Rules, VFR. Under VFR, pilots are required to maintain sight of the ground and other landmarks to navigate safely. But with the fog enveloping the area, those visual cues disappeared, leaving the pilot in a precarious position. The pilot had the option of switching to Instrument Flight Rules (IFR), which would allow him to rely on the helicopter's instruments rather than visual references. However, transitioning to IFR in such a crowded airspace can be complicated, requiring clearance from air traffic control and additional coordination to ensure that the flight path is safe. Unfortunately, the situation escalated too quickly, leaving the pilot with limited options. Final leg of the flight extended. The helicopter was finally given clearance to continue its journey, but by now, the fog had become an overwhelming obstacle. The once clear skies had turned into a thick gray soup, making it nearly impossible to see anything below or ahead. The pilot, now flying without the benefit of visual cues, was tasked with navigating through an increasingly disorienting environment. Pilots call this phenomenon spatial disorientation, where the absence of visual reference points can confuse even the most experienced aviators. In such conditions, it can be difficult to determine the helicopter's altitude, position, or speed relative to the ground. Pilots are trained to trust their instruments in these situations, but it's easier said than done when conditions deteriorate so rapidly. As the helicopter approached the rugged hills of Calabasas, the terrain became a deadly factor. The hills in this area rise sharply from the ground, and in low visibility conditions, they can be nearly impossible to see until it's too late. The pilot, likely unaware of just how close they were to the hills, descended into dangerous territory. In these final moments, the helicopter lost altitude rapidly. The pilot may have been trying to correct the descent, but without visual reference or clear instrumentation, It was impossible to determine the helicopter's exact position relative to the ground. The crash extended. Tragically, the Sikorsky S-76B helicopter collided with the hillside at a high rate of speed. The impact was devastating, leaving no chance of survival for anyone on board. The crash site, located in a remote and difficult-to-reach area, was strewn with debris, a testament to the sheer force of the impact. The disorientation caused by the thick fog combined with the complex terrain created a perfect storm of factors that led to the crash. The passengers, who just minutes earlier were anticipating a routine trip, were now victims of an unimaginable tragedy. There was no time to react, no time to prepare for what was coming. The world would soon learn that none of the passengers, including the beloved sports figure and his family, had survived. The shockwaves of this loss reverberated across the globe, as fans, friends, and family struggled to process the enormity of the tragedy. Immediate aftermath extended. As news of the crash began to break, there was widespread disbelief. The initial reports were confusing, and many hoped that it was just a mistake or a minor accident. But as the details emerged, it became clear that this was a full-scale tragedy. Emergency responders arrived at the crash site, but their efforts were hampered by the remote location and difficult terrain. The wreckage was scattered across a wide area, and there were no signs of life. It was immediately clear that the crash had been fatal for everyone on board. The world watched in horror as the story unfolded. News outlets covered the tragedy extensively, with tributes pouring in from across the globe. Celebrities, athletes, and fans alike